Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. You can also engage with us through Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to many friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back for this fourth and final episode of our 4-week mini-series entitled How to Do Short-Term Missions with Excellence. We're hoping that this series already has been helpful for churches and other groups that are considering short-term ministry in the near future. Please pass along the links to people who might benefit from it. We're seeking to help everyone cultivate long-term fruit through short-term ministries. In the previous 3 episodes, we've unpacked 5 standards of excellence: God-centeredness, empowering partnerships, mutual design, comprehensive administration, and qualified leadership. Today, we're going to visit the final 2 standards: appropriate training and thorough follow-through. Well, today we welcome back Don Johnson for his 3rd interview on the Global Missions Podcast. Don, I think you are tied at 3 with J.D. Payne for having the most interviews on the podcast.
That's some pretty serious company there. I'm humbled.
Well, we're glad to have you back. For those that haven't heard those other episodes, Don has been a mission worker with Send International since 1986, and he has served at a radio station in Alaska, then in Far East Russia, and then after that in the U.S. Home Office. Currently, he is an assistant to the Send USA director and chairman of the board for Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Mission. Don is a guy who has hosted short-term teams. He has led short-term teams. He has trained short-term teams and their leaders. And so he brings enormous credibility and experience to share with us. Don, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for having me again.
Looking forward to our discussion today. Some may have heard this before, Don, but just take a minute, please, and tell us a bit about your role at Standards of Excellence, how you got there, and what you're doing there.
Well, I first got involved with the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Mission back in 2003, right when the standards were being launched. And I've been engaged in a variety of roles in various committees. Currently, I'm the chairman of the board for the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Mission, and that puts me in a variety of positions to be able to assist with training. I go into conferences or churches or various venues and present training on the standards and then also on specific issues within short-term missions or other topics within missions. It's a new role for me, being on that side of the nonprofit sector, being on the board, but it's exciting and challenging.
Good. Well, our listeners know, or you may know, that we are actually in a mini-series right now. And so today is the final episode where we're going to cover with Don the final 2 standards of excellence in short-term mission. Now, there are 7 standards total. So these are the 6th and 7th standards. They are, number 6, appropriate training, and number 7, thorough follow-through. Not surprisingly, Don, we're going to begin with number 6 there, and we want to jump into this. What are some of the dangers or difficulties our short-term mission faces if there isn't appropriate training?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that a short-term mission trip is very different from being a tourist on a vacation visiting another culture.
Right.
Short-term missions moves you into deeper involvement in the culture. You kind of see underneath the surface. You get involved in spiritual issues in people's lives, maybe spiritual warfare. There's a lot more involved on a deeper level on a short-term mission trip. And without training, a lot of times the short-termers just don't know what they don't know. The training gives short-termers tools, understanding, insight that they need, not just to accomplish the ministry, whatever it is they've gone there to do, but also to navigate issues like unmet expectations, culture stress, engaging appropriately within the culture. Mm-hmm. You've got team dynamics. All these things can work together and accomplish a lot of good, or if there's not been any really preparation for that, they can actually lead to some emotional, physical, or spiritual harm, either to the short-termers or to the national hosts or expatriate missionaries that they're working with. One missionary I talked to spent a year in Haiti, receiving short-term teams from North America. Mm-hmm. And he came back to his sending church really upset, lamenting that in his experience, by his records, only 1 out of 7 short-term teams were actually a blessing to him in the field.
Whoa.
The others often did as much harm as they did good, or maybe sometimes even more harm than good.
Wow, that's not a good record. I wonder, just from, and it's a generalization, I appreciate, but generally speaking, would you say that from the West, we're doing a good job of training, or are we 1 for 7?
His numbers are actually a little bit worse than the research shows. Research puts it at 1 out of 5
Oh,
or
boy.
positive. So that still leaves 80% out there. And within the standards of excellence, we say we're targeting the other 80%. So there are national hosts and missionaries who are still struggling with some of the problems or issues or lack of training that the short-termers or short-term teams come with.
We want to affirm that churches who send out short-term mission teams and anyone participating there is going out on good intentions. Brian Heerwagen in the first episode of this miniseries talked about that. He said there's great intentions, but sometimes the how we do it doesn't lead to great outcomes. We hope that this series will help with that, of course. Don, as we think about training then, what are some of the essential components, let's say, of appropriate training for short-term mission?
Well, first off, appropriate training has to be a priority and intentional. It takes time, investment, and work. And there's 3 key categories of things that we look at in terms of short-term missions and training. It should be biblical, appropriate, and timely. Taking a look at biblical.
Yeah, sure.
Training should be presented by qualified instructors that have a solid biblical basis. Topics can function like a reminder from Scripture of the biblical basis for missions, God's view of the world, how God wants to use me to engage the world, the need for consistent and persistent prayer. All those things need to be woven into the training from beginning to end. The training needs to be appropriate for the team that's going. They need to have training in cross-cultural communication and theory in general, but they also need some training in the specifics of the culture that they're going to be working with. There should be some time spent in personal preparation. That's things like asking God to show me how He wants to change me, preparing my heart to function well on a team, to be able to listen more than speak, sometimes when I'm in another culture. All those kind of things are very personal, and it takes some time and training to explain why you need to incorporate these things. There's logistical stuff. That's always there. The plane fares, housing, food, health, all that kind of stuff. And all that is included along with preparation for whatever the intended activity is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to do evangelism, here's some evangelism tools. We're going to do construction. Here's how this is going to work. So you want the training to be first biblically based and then appropriate for that particular team or individual. And then you want it timely. Too often, the short-termers' first exposure to the insights of the culture they're going to be working with is once they've actually arrived on the field. And that cultural training and insight should be presented much earlier in the process. Mm-hmm. Things like the importance of prayer and dependence on God should be integrated very early in the process. But other things, like some of those logistical things, like the plane tickets and health concerns,
right?
Those sort of things, those can come very much later. Unfortunately, those are often the things people want to talk about. Those are the kind of fun things, but that can be delayed. And being timely means also beyond just training pre-field, there's some training that needs to be ongoing while you're on the trip. For example, it's one thing to kind of explain what culture shock is or cross-cultural stress is beforehand, but it can mean a whole lot more if you continue that training while the individual is on the field and they're experiencing it. Mm-hmm. Now they're seeing it and they understand some of the concepts you tried to put together earlier. So training has to be timely, has to continue on and meet the person where they are, what they need at that point in order to be really fully equipped to do short-term missions well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to me also you're pointing to pre-field preparation, pre-field training, but also when you talk about on-field training, when it's happening, when that group is in that mission environment, that means that your team leader also has to be ready to continue the training. I know that you spend time, you believe in the investment of especially preparing team leaders, right?
Absolutely. David Livermore, who's written some books on this particular topic, has come out to say so strongly that your team leader is the key factor for short-term teams. He or she can make or break the short-term experience. And I agree with that. I buy into what he's saying there. Yeah, within what I do a lot of training of the team leaders because that, I think, is really critical.
Sure. That's an adjacent discussion maybe, but just for our listeners to really kind of tag that idea that who's going to be leading the team and not to assume that they will be able to do everything there. Of course, teams work that way like a body, but are we giving the appropriate attention to preparing whoever's leading that team? And there are resources for this, and the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Mission is a place you can access some of those resources too. Don, I want to ask you this. Let's say there's someone listening from a church right now and they're thinking about getting a team out maybe in 2018 in the next few months or sometime this year, and they realize they don't have the training available to them yet. It's not in the church right now. What advice would you have for them to step toward healthy training?
Couple of things. There are some really good materials online. Some of you can find different websites. I'll mention at the end of our discussion. Also, contacting the Standards of Excellence office. We have people there that are on staff that could come and do training, team leader training for you. I'll come do team leader training. Start asking the question, and you'll find all kinds of resources out there.
Well, we'll try and direct to some of those resources that can be trusted with Don's help. Watch in the show notes for that on the website. Don, as we talk about doing short-term mission really well in a God-honoring way, that first standard, that it's all God-honoring, we talked about goers, we talked about senders, and we talked about the receivers, those who will have the missionary workers come to them. Is it just the goers who need training, or do we need to broaden our idea about training to include the other stakeholders?
Yeah, typically we focus exclusively on the goers, and realistically, the bulk of the training probably should be focused there, but not exclusively. There are ways in which both senders and the host receivers need to experience some training. For senders, you can just provide training in how to give and why to give to missions, kind of a biblical basis. Sometimes people it's kind of an emotional response. Oh, my nephew's going on a short-term mission trip. Okay, I'll send in $25. But training can be provided to help them understand how missions functions, why their nephew needs the money. The whole structure of that is a whole area of training. And training beyond just writing the check. There are other ways to support, providing logistical support, helping people get to the airport, or helping them get stuff they need for their suitcases, some of the travel things they need. There's emotional support, just being there when someone's getting a little scared, come alongside and pray with them to know how to pray for your short-termers. And a really critical one is training the senders to know what to communicate and how to communicate with the short-termers while they're out of the country. Managing some of that social media, cell phone technology. Sometimes if the senders, they want to connect, they want to know how to pray, but they do it at the wrong time or in an inappropriate way, which then can cause problems for the team or for the national hosts. On the other end, the host receivers often need some training. If you're working with a national partner, a national church or pastor who doesn't know North American culture, they could use some cultural training as well. Here's what North Americans are like. Here's the cultural background they're coming from. And even if you're working with expat missionaries, there may be generational differences between the expat missionary who's facilitating your trip and the team members that are on your team. I spent some time in Japan with a group of about 40 different mission agencies talking about this very issue. They were really struggling with their short-termers, and they didn't understand why they had so many problems with them and why they weren't coming back for longer periods of time. And I went there and began to give them training on the differences between baby boomers and millennials. And their eyes just got wide, and they were like, wow, that explains so much. I realized that a lot of our expat missionaries who might be hosting or facilitating this process, they're not living in North America. They haven't seen the changes in the generations that maybe the typical person in the church pew has. So sometimes just providing that explanation of here's what short-termers are like, here's what North Americans are like, can be a huge help in making things go smoothly once the team is there working with the nationals or the missionaries.
Right. Well, it's really good insight there. Generational differences, even between folks who have come from the same sending area or sending country. They might all be from the United States, but those generational differences need to be accounted for as well. I like the model that's been mentioned along this way of saying senders, goers, and recipients. Often when I'm in a church, in fact, last week when I was in a church, I asked the church this question: which is more important as we go about mission, the senders or the goers? Don't answer too quickly. And it was a young man, he might have been 12 or 14 years old, from the side who called out, both are important. And I like the fact that you are bringing the idea of training and preparation both to the goer, of course, that's the obvious element, but that you're also thinking and encouraging us to prepare the senders as well. I think that's going to lead to better fruit in the home environment afterwards as well. I'm getting ahead of myself because we're talking about follow through, but it's setting the stage for better fruit afterwards if we're all
Absolutely
well prepared.
Yeah.
Okay, in order to have training, we need to have qualified trainers or instructors. Those people might be in a local church, but I wonder if you would just describe what are some of the characteristics of qualified instructors that a church should look for when they're training for short-term mission?
Well, a qualified instructor, qualified trainer should have had some training themselves in short-term missions. They attended a conference on short-term missions, read some of the books or articles out there, attended webinars.
Hopefully participated themselves, right?
And yeah, that's the next thing. And have had some type of personal experience participating in short-term missions, preferably as a team leader. Someone that's gone, several times as a part of the team can be good, or someone that's been a host for short-term missionaries on the field, like a former missionary who's retired and come back and has hosted a lot of teams. They can bring a lot of wealth of insights into training your team. Beyond that, having the kind of the basic knowledge of short-term, of missions, missiology, that kind of thing, they should be gifted and skilled at presenting these concepts to others. Not every gifted speaker is qualified to provide short-term training. Not every experienced short-termer can lead others in engaging training and effective learning.
Yeah.
You want your qualified trainer to have both. They're not putting people to sleep within the first hour of presenting or talking, and they really know the subject well and can put people at ease, help answer their questions, has kind of a well to draw from in dealing with whatever might come up.
Well, I think all that advice is going to apply to what I add here. I hope that churches will find agencies helpful in this matter. We still need to affirm that there's both the qualification, the experience, and can I say the engagement factor, that there's, a level of presentation that's going to be appropriate to the group. But maybe you have a mission agency that is headquartered or has personnel in your area, and that would be another place that you could inquire and say, if you need some training expertise, maybe they either have it or can recommend it to you as well. Well, there's this important topic of training, and we want to affirm the high value of that together with Don. In a moment, we're going to talk about the importance of follow-through, that seventh and final standard of excellence. Just before we get to that, we're going to take a short break and share with you a resource that may be helpful for you and your church.
Have you taken Kairos? The Kairos course is a 9-session interactive course on world Christian mission designed to educate, inspire, and challenge Christians to active and meaningful participation. You can hear more about the Kairos course right here on the Global Missions Podcast by listening to episode number 7. Visit www.kairoscourse.org today to find a course near you. And now, back to today's conversation.
Well, we're back with Don Johnson, who is chairman for the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Mission. The website, by the way, is soe.org. And we'd encourage you to stop by there. There's some great resources there on the website, and that will serve as a springboard as well to other resources. Today, we're talking about how to do short-term missions in a God-honoring way, which means that we're going to honor both the senders, the goers, and the recipients of short-term mission. Now, Don, let's move on from the 6th standard. We just finished on great training. We want to move to the 7th and final standard, thorough follow-through. Now, I don't mind admitting that this is one of the areas I'm really concerned about in short-term mission. I see lots of engagement leading up to and even during short-term mission. I'm concerned that we continue to cultivate the fruit of short-term mission. So, what is thorough follow-through and why is it so important?
Yeah, you're right, Mags. Research again and again on a big scale and small scale shows that this is the one area where churches, schools, agencies, anybody who's doing short-term missions really feels like they're the weakest, they're struggling the most. Either one of the most common laments I hear from pastors or missions pastors is, hey, we sent out a short-term team a year ago or 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. They came back all excited about Lord and ministry, but it's all gone, it's all disappeared. In other cases, researchers have found that some short-termers come back with some very significant struggles that leave them stuck in their walk with the Lord. I think a lot of times these situations can be remedied with thorough follow-through. We typically think of a short-term mission as being 2 weeks or 10 days, or if we're really well versed, we might say, well, it's that plus the training sessions on the front end. But too often when the short-termers walk off the plane, you think, okay, we are done with the short-term mission project. It's over with. Maybe have a homecoming party or show some slides at the church.
Right.
But there's a whole lot of loose ends potential out there that need to be tied off, and growth needs to be captured. Any struggles need to be dealt with. That's what thorough follow-through does.
Well, affirming the value of it and even affirming that generally we're not getting strong grades. I know there are exceptions, but as a movement, we're not getting strong grades in this. What are some of the elements that Standards of Excellence shows to be part of a thorough follow-through?
We look at it in terms of 3 aspects. One is debriefing, then the personal follow-through, the individual follow-through, and then evaluations.
Okay.
Debriefing is more of an event with the group or individual. It can take place, and actually should take place multiple times throughout the short-term mission experience, pre-field, on-field, and post-field. And people will say, wait a minute, how do you debrief pre-field?
Great question.
And every training session should include some time for debriefing. During the training, people are being exposed to new ideas, challenged with new information. Maybe some of it's kind of scary, kind of intimidating.
Right.
They need some time to talk about that and process that, particularly if you've got a team, to process that as a group. Then every day on the field, you have on-field debrief. How did it go today? How did you feel when this happened or that happened? Things are going on. And often, and I've been guilty of this myself, focusing that on-field debrief just on the goers, but your host receivers could probably stand some debriefing as well. They're being challenged maybe with some new things or new concepts, new approaches. They're being challenged with also functioning cross-culturally. And you wouldn't want to do the debriefs together because you want people to be able to share openly and honestly some of their struggles or whatever. But both groups should have a chance to process and be prodded and poked a little bit to draw out some of those things that maybe they're processing inside their head and need some help with.
So just to be clear here on this one, you're saying that the mission worker, while they're on the field, should debrief on a regular basis, as well as it could be a mission worker who's there long-term that's hosting the team, or maybe national sisters and brothers who have received these mission workers. They should also have some intentional debriefing ongoing.
Absolutely. This is not just a North American event. We're engaging with another culture, other churches. We want to see them grow and be blessed and benefited from this as well.
Yeah. I want to bring out one other point that I thought was really good. When you talked about pre-field debriefing, and I thought, wow, how's that going to go? But it seems to me what you're really cultivating is a habit of intentional reflection. And if that is happening before those short-term workers even leave for the field, it's much more likely to happen on the field, which means it's more likely to happen after as well. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be a big, heavy kind of situation. One of the little tools that I recommend is something called just the one-word event, where you say, give me one word that describes how you felt about, or give me one word that describes what it was like when. And you can do that kind of on the fly, riding on the bus. You stop by and you're talking to one of your other team members and say, give me one word. And that can become kind of a catchphrase. You start that in the pre-field training. On the field, it's very simple. People know exactly what you're talking about. Say, give me one word. And they know exactly where you're going.
Super, super. One word could become just part of the culture of the team as they serve.
And that one word, you don't end there. That opens the door then to delve in further if there's a reason or you sense that there's something more you want to probe for. But pushing someone to be able to kind of fine-tune their thoughts, their feelings down into one word really helps bring it to a pinpoint. And then as a leader or the debriefer, you can know exactly where you need to go or might want to go in helping them process things.
So the first element of a thorough follow-through is debriefing. What's the second element?
Well, you also want to debrief when you come back. This is when you have kind of a big debrief that people really kind of think about or might have in mind when you use that term. And that's when you really kind of take some time to delve in together as a team and express what's been going on. That can lead into opening the door to seeing what people might be experiencing in terms of how God is speaking to them, what they're learning, what they're questioning, what their issues might be. There was one short-term missions leader who was asked if he had to choose between pre-field training and post-field debrief, which would you choose? And he chose post-field debrief. When asked why, he said, well, often people are going to come back kind of with one of two scenarios in their background. Either they had a tremendous experience with God. They saw God use them in new ways, maybe discovered some new gifting, got a new vision for what God's doing in the world. They come back all excited and ready to plug that back into their life and ministry. And there's no one there to help them figure out how to do that. And all that enthusiasm kind of just dies on the vine, like those pastors I mentioned earlier on who say, what happened to all that enthusiasm the team came back with? Or the other scenario is maybe they're really struggling with some things. Maybe they're asking, how can a loving God allow babies to be born in this horrible situation we were just in? Or send really nice people to hell because they don't have Jesus? Those are some big things that need to be addressed. And having that debrief is a chance for them to express that, get it out, and it gives the debriefer a sense of direction for the next steps.
So could we say that that's the first element there is kind of the ongoing debriefing, the reflective mode that might be day by day, but this second element is a debrief where we fly up higher and we consolidate some of the experience together and look at the fruit, look at how God is at work there.
Yeah, and that the leader or debriefer needs to be listening not just with their ears, but with their heart to help them understand what's going on their teams and begin to evaluate what might take place as they begin to invest in the thorough follow-through for that particular individual.
Sure. Just before you get to the third element, Don, I'm going to insert here a reference to a tool that may be helpful along these lines. It's something that we've been developing for use by any mission agency or by any church. It's called the Go Journal, and it is a printed or online journal that helps with pre-field reflection, on-field reflection, and especially post-field reflection. And I think it would serve all of what we've talked about here so far in this seventh element. It's available online. You can have a look at it at gojournal.org. So, Don, you've mentioned the ongoing debriefing of all the participants, a really thoughtful and appropriate follow-through debriefing for goers. What's the third element of a thorough follow-through?
For the thorough follow-through to, I think, really embrace all the things you want to happen, what I hear a lot of times from team leaders or those who are doing debriefing as well, I can't take this person and hold them by hand for the rest of their life. And so what I encourage is something I call the handoff. The team leader or debriefer doesn't need to take on all that responsibility, but they can take on responsibility for making sure that each team member, each short-termer is connected to the next person in their life who can help them continue to grow, continue in their discipleship. If someone is observed on the trip that seems to have a really good gift for teaching, make sure they're connected with the Christian ed person back in your church. If they seem to have some really cross-cultural gifting or some cross-cultural interest, make sure they get plugged into someone leading an immigrant outreach locally, or connect them with a mission agency or missions pastor who can help them explore the possibility of longer-term service in missions. Or if they come back and they're struggling with some of those things I mentioned earlier, you don't want to leave them there. But the team leader doesn't need to become the theologian, but make sure they get connected to a pastor or counselor in the church who can help them walk through these things, make sure that they come to a solid theological understanding, make sure that any depression is dealt with. Each person should be handed off to the next one in their lives. And then the team leader or debriefer can kind of step back and finally release them because they're getting thorough follow-through. And you don't want to forget to make sure that you're getting evaluations, feedback from everybody involved. That's where you begin to see where things are going well and where things should be improved.
Well, what I heard you saying about the team leader, Don, is really that they don't need to know it all, but they serve their team by helping to make connections afterwards.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important because some people might step up or be asked to step up into the role of leading a team, and they may be reluctant for a bunch of reasons, but one of which is, they're not an expert in everything. They don't know all the answers. And we really want to say that a team leader doesn't necessarily have all the answers, but will help certainly step toward those answers by connecting to the right resources along the way. I hope that's freeing for some potential team leaders as you think about serving a group of goers. I just would tuck in here too. We did do an episode. I mentioned Donna has been on the program before. Episode 22 of the Global Missions Podcast, that's 22, is entitled How to Debrief a Short-Term Mission Team. So if you'd like to dig a little deeper there, then you can visit again with Don on episode 22. You can find that on the website there. Don, I wonder, illustrations are always example. I wonder if you could give us an example when you've really seen a super practice of thorough and appropriate follow-through.
Yeah, I was just at a church in Southern California a couple of months ago and was kind of evaluating and observing their short-term program and got some stories from them. In one case, they had a short-term team that was on their way to an overseas ministry when the person on the team who was scheduled to lead worship music lost his passport, had to go home. That's a whole big chunk of your team and plans gone. Well, there was another member on the team who could sing and play guitar, had never led worship before, never been engaged in that way, but they pressed him into service because he really needed to try and step up and help out here. And the whole team and the nationals were just amazed at how God used him as a worship leader. The team leader observed this. When the team got back, right away, the team leader is contacting others in the church saying, is there a group or ministry in our church that needs someone to lead worship? And so now that guy leads the worship meetings for the adult singles group every week. Another team they sent out was more of a local team. It was going to work with an immigrant population there locally. There was an older couple that signed up and never got involved in any kind of ministry engagement in the church before, but they saw God use them in ways that they just never could imagine. They came back so excited from that experience. They wanted to know what can we do? And it was kind of observed that even though they were an older couple, they really seemed to relate well with younger teenagers. And so they got plugged in with the youth pastor. Again, the team leader almost took them by the hand and said, hey, we've seen this couple really can be used in working with teens. Do you have a ministry for them? Well, now they're hosting a discipleship group of younger teenagers in their home every week. They love it. Their teenagers love it. And that's a case where both those are cases where the church has kind of captured that growth. It's not lost. It's redirected. But sometimes people just need a held hand to take them there, a little direction. Here's where this can be plugged into our home church.
Two beautiful examples, actually, of how there's value in the sending congregation, if I can say it that way, because of the short-term mission. Yes, there was value in that context, but it enriched and blessed and advanced discipleship, if I can say it that way, in the sending congregation.
Yeah, and that's, again, answering that lament from pastors that I mentioned earlier on. Where did it go? It's got to be intentionally captured.
I want to ask for an example of where you've seen evaluation done really well. Talk to us about that evaluation. We've got the debrief now. How do we evaluate all that we've done?
Most evaluations are done with forms or online where you send an evaluation out to everybody that's been involved, the goers, the senders, the receivers, and ask different questions about it. And that's helpful, and that can be a starting point. But the evaluations are really best when there's a solid relationship of trust and accountability between everybody that's involved, and when they're actually discussed personally, either on the phone or by way of Skype. This helps both parties ensure they're being heard and are getting the clearest picture of the short-term project from the other's perspective.
So you encourage not only the written evaluation then, but some, if it's possible, or can create that possibility of a verbal evaluation together as well.
In some cultures, it's difficult to get honest feedback, especially if that feedback might include something kind of negative, might be perceived as negative in some way.
Very difficult for some cultures to do that, right? They're very reluctant to say anything bad about the people that have visited them or anything like that.
Absolutely. Either it's culturally taboo, or there's a concern that, hey, if I say something negative, that may harm the partnership. They may not come back again. They may not continue to work with us. One organization I've studied worked in a cultural setting where both of those factors were kind of an issue, and they were concerned that they weren't getting, kind of the really clear picture. They were just kind of being told what they thought the other people thought they wanted to hear. But they intentionally set out to build a relationship. Over a period of years, they would call the national partners, not just after a team had left, but throughout the year, and just say, hey, how's the ministry going? What's happening? And that built such a relationship of communication and trust that when they actually had a team come that made some mistakes, the national hosts felt very comfortable saying, hey, we're not concerned that you're going to withdraw your partnership. We believe that we can be direct with you. Here's some of the mistakes that were made. And this sending agency was so thrilled because they could go back to the church and say, here's some things we messed up on. Here's how we want to change this in the future. But it was all based on developing that relationship and that deep level of trust and accountability.
Well, here I hope that the mission agency can be helpful as well. And sometimes even as an intermediary, a third party, Don, you've seen that, I know, where there's a sending church and a receiving context, and the agency can serve as a communicator. Sometimes there are language barriers. Often there are cultural barriers. If you can have a trusted agency partner that can serve helpfully in that way, please consider that. Don, we'll wrap up our conversation here, but I want to invite you to share with our listeners about the resources that they'll find at SOE and how our listeners can contact you, reach out your way.
Sure. Yeah, on the SOE website, click the tab for resources. That'll take you to a list of a variety of books, CDs, software, other things. You can also go to another website called stmtoolbox.org. It's soon going to be enveloped into the whole SOE structure, but it also will have you directed to a bunch of resources like blogs, websites of other organizations that have information. And another great one is shorttermmissions.com. That site has a listing of short-term mission opportunities, along with some great articles, a lot of them actually written by the field missionaries, the host missionaries who've worked with short-termers. Great insights and education you can find there. And I'd be glad to serve as a resource. My email address is djohnson@send.org. If you got a question, if I don't have the answer, I'm probably connected to somebody that can get that answer for you. I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you for offering that and for being generous with that. Some great resources that you can spring forward from SOE.org that Don has mentioned there. You'll find those in the show notes on the website at globalmissionspodcast.com. Don, just want to thank you again for spending the time with us unpacking these two standards. Firstly, making sure that we're doing really great training for our short-term missions, and then secondly, making sure that we do thoughtful and appropriate follow-through. It's been great to have you with us again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks to Global Missions Podcast for investing into the world of missions in North America.
Well, that brings to a conclusion our 4-part mini-series about the 7 standards of excellence for short-term missions. We'd like to thank Brian, Randy, Tori, and Dawn for taking time to share with us about how to do short-term missions more effectively. We hope that this mini-series has been helpful for you and your church, and we'd really like to know what you thought about this mini-series format. Would you send us a note on our website or on social media to let us know what you think? Should we do it again? Does it work? Remember, too, that you can find show notes on the website as well as links to the key resources, the summary of the standards of excellence, and the longer, more detailed guide. That's all for today. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Jaffrey Center for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for listening. We will be back again in 2 weeks with a new episode, and we will continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.